Welcome to Dear Rach and Soph. I am Sophie Green and I do not have Rachel Johns with me because at the time I'm recording this, it's just after the Romance Writers of Australia conference in Tasmania, which Rachel went to directly after giving a keynote speech and a workshop at the Romance Writers of New Zealand conference. So she's lost her voice. And so I'm doing this on my own, but fear not, I have done a lot of interviewing on my own, mostly in my country music life, but I have also interviewed authors. So hopefully this will all go very well. And I'm very much looking forward to talking to my guest for this episode, who is Dr. Michelle Johnston. Now, Michelle is an emergency physician, as her title suggests, as well as an author. She is a staff specialist at the Royal Perth Hospital Emergency Department, which is a busy inner city trauma centre where she works as both clinician and teacher. Her first novel, Dustfall, was published by UWA Publishing in February 2018 and shortlisted for the Mudd Literary Prize for a debut novel in 2019. Her second novel, Tiny Uncertain Miracles, was published by HarperCollins in 2022. Her latest novel is The Revisionists, which is an absorbing, unputdownable novel about ambition and how we curate our own stories and rescript our memories in order to survive. So I'm going to ask her quite a few questions about The Revisionists. I love it. I think she's a brilliant writer, so I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and I hope you are too. See you on the other side. I'm very pleased to be talking to Dr. Michelle Johnston, as she is officially, but Michelle Johnston on the cover of her book. Hello, Michelle.
Hello, and thanks so much for having me on your podcast.
It's great to meet you. This is such an unforgettable novel, The Revisionists. It's really, from the first page, I was all in, and even given that I am a writer and also work in publishing, I have that professional interest in trying to work out how it comes about. But I think it always starts with a writer's intention and their life experiences all kind of fulminating in one moment. So I'm actually going to start right back at the beginning, maybe, and ask you what came first, writing or medicine?
That's a very good question. I think they were kind of taking this parallel path my entire life. I was a very, very early and kind of prodigious reader, as almost all writers tend to be from a very young age. So I think that was just like fomenting in the background, just constantly being a reader, lover of literature. But it was really very much maybe in the subconscious part of my brain. Back in the day when I went into medicine, it was honestly one of those, just fall into it. If you got the marks, you wanted to help people, you went into medicine. There was very little choice about that. Not that I regret it, but it certainly took up a lot of brain space for a good 20, 30 years, while the reading continued. And I had this weird thing. I always actually considered myself a writer without having written a thing, or certainly not having submitted anything, not being brave enough to submit anything, but always just actually thinking of myself as a writer, I think because just of this love of language. And then eventually I get to the point and say, well, you know what, I actually should put my money where my mouth is and write. And I was always drawn to the long form, to the novel, because I've loved it so much. So my first novel, Dustfall, was completed in 2018. It certainly was commenced a good, perhaps decade before then, because I thought I was a writer, not realizing that I didn't know how to write. And really only through that, the revision and the feedback and the realizing that there's a vast chasm between what you think you are able to produce and what you actually do produce to actually get to the stage of having a publishable first novel.
Yeah, right. I think it's also, given that you already had a professional career, you've done your study, and medicine is such a long road to get to the point of practicing, and emergency medicine is a specialty. So it's not as if you just leave med school and go, oh, hey, that's great, I'm an emergency doctor. You have to do a whole lot of stuff. So the decision to actually then embark on a parallel but different career from scratch, I think takes a fair amount of bravery, actually, because you're taking a big risk.
Yeah, and not only that, you kind of get to the point where you're in the other career, but at the top of your game, you're a female, you've worked hard, you've got respect, people listen to you when you speak, and then you start writing and you're like a baby again, and you have to learn to be told that's not very good and go back and do it again. It's like you have to return to the child in you to learn this completely new skill and be open enough to go, okay, I'm not actually very good. I need to get better. And listening to people and experts when they tell you that, it's kind of hard to take that to really retreat back to that person inside that will take be taught again and to be open to be taught. I found that quite challenging. I just thought, oh, I'll be able to do this. I've read enough and read it. No, she wasn't able to do this. It took a lot of kind of self-reflection and insight. And as being a writer, revision, rewriting, and having that humility to go, actually, you're not very good.
Well, and again, that whole thing of, yes, you were so good at your day job, in inverted commas, and then this is a very new discipline. So I'm wondering, when you made the decision to start writing, well, you said the novel began 10 years before, or Dustfall began 10 years before it was actually completed or finished, as in published. How were you starting to fit that in around your work and other commitments? Was it a question of, I'm going to just set aside some time each week, or was it really just in whatever moments you could get to it?
Yeah, because emergency medicine is a very sort of scrappy job when it comes to hours. So it had to very much fit it. And having two children who I was just trying not to make sure they didn't die during their childhood from neglect, that, just really fitting it around whenever I could. And I think there was one, you have a few peculiar talents, I think, to get to the point of publishing. And one of them is just pure pig-headedness and just the utter unwavering belief that if I put in enough work, it'll eventually get to that stage. And just finding the time to sit down and to focus on what I was doing, because, as it's a very easy thing to sit down at the desk and just not right. And I still find it, but I've got a lot better at like code switching. So my brain would go from doctor mode to writer mode, and I wouldn't, I'd be very strict upon myself to switch, to go, okay, now this is writing time. You've only got a few hours. This is it. It's this or nothing. So just fitting it around that time. It's easy. I mean, it becomes easier as time goes on, as you would well know, that you become better at like slotting into the writer brain. The writer brain is on a lot of the time, even when you're not writing. It was challenging to start off with, and it would be early mornings or late nights, and not feeling like you're getting anywhere, just treading water, but kind of having this unwavering belief that there might be something at the end of it that was worthwhile.
Yeah. Were you ever tempted to give up?
I think I'm just too pig-headed to give up. I just kind of, no, I would just, no, look, there have been moments where I thought, this is stupid. I shouldn't be doing this. Why can't you just be normal, Michelle? But they're fleeting. That normality doesn't creep in too often. So I'm quite happy to just carry on.
Yeah, and it's also, it raises that delicious question of what is normal. Because I think for you, given your work background, it would be normal actually to take on. I do know doctors who are polymaths. I know a doctor in Sydney called Professor Mohammed Kadra, who's a professor of surgery. He's worked in various hospitals. I was his literary agent. He wrote brilliant books. He's now painting because he's just decided, well,
he needs something new, right? Yeah,
something new. He's also still working in medicine, but so I do think doctors in particular, I found, are inclined towards being polymaths.
I think it's probably more being reasonably driven, just driven to produce or to keep moving forward. I think possibly that's as much as anything. We just got this innate kind of, you just got, I don't know. I can't speak for other doctors, but I know that, I'm not very good at leisure time. I'm actually terrible. I just need to be doing something that's productive. It's not healthy, but I don't pretend to be healthy.
So, with Dustfall, you obviously were working on the manuscript for a while. How did you come to be published? Did you find an agent? Did you submit directly to UWA?
Yeah, I found myself an agent, reasonably early on. I'm not quite sure how I got so lucky for that to happen. However, I ended up submitting to Terry Ann White, my guardian angel, who opened the first door for me in UWA Publishing back in 2018. We had come to know each other through, just being part of the writing community in Perth, which is, reasonably small, and everyone knows each other. So it's great. She was happy to look at it, and she did look at it, and she's if you know Terry Ann, she's what a marvel of a woman, but she's a little bit scary sometimes. And she summoned me to her office, and she just looked furious. And I thought, oh my God, what have I done? And she just kind of listed off all the things that were wrong with it. And she said, off you go. And I thought, oh God. And I didn't realize she was telling me, off you go and rewrite it, because I'm really interested.
Right.
I just didn't, I was,
She
yeah,
buried
anyway.
the lead.
Yeah. So, but she did. And then she was such a champion of the book, such a champion of the book. And really, I certainly wouldn't, I don't think I'd be, look, I don't know. You never know what's going to happen, but I was incredibly grateful for that opening the door to the industry, because we all know how difficult it is to access the industry for so many different reasons.
Mm-hmm. And Terry Ann did move on from UWA, so and so did you. So you moved on to HarperCollins for book 2, and I would imagine that the Terry Ann shift had something to do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I got my then I moved agents, because I just, there were lots of reasons, but I thought, it's interesting coming from WA. I mean, I know that Rach, bless her, we're missing her on the podcast. She's a massive WA success story, but it's actually not all that easy to get traction on the East Coast if you're from a WA writer, and that's once again for probably lots of different reasons. And I just wanted to say, well, maybe I'd like the opportunity to like branch out a little bit. So I then got signed up by Martin Shaw, who is my agent now, who I absolutely adore. He's wonderful, wonderful human. And that's kind of how the 2-book deal came about with HarperCollins, Fourth Estate, with Catherine Milne, Queen of Publishing. Love that one. She's amazing.
Yeah, I think it's a great point actually about being on the West Coast and the difficulties there in creative endeavors, because I also have this life in country music, and whenever I talk to Western Australian musical artists, this comes up. It's logistically difficult for them to tour, for example, to the East Coast,
Yeah.
but just to stay connected with the industry, to do networking. They have like the Tamworth Country Music Festival to go to, but there's no equivalent for writers to gather once a year in the one place and make those connections. So unless you're sort of flying around to writers' festivals and doing events and those sorts of things, it's impossible actually.
Yeah, it's really tough going. And I said, but yeah, so with the last book, so with the Revisionists, I kind of had said, look, just put me in front of anybody. I'll fly myself there. I will go, just put myself in front of a crowd. So I had a few lovely small events on the East Coast, which were beautiful, and it was a joy to come and do them. But it's just harder it's hard for everybody to kind of get out there and get, as I said, get some traction, get legs in with publicity. But you just have to do what you can, really.
Yeah, and it's a 5-hour flight, which is
Yes.
not inconsiderable in a
No,
life,
but it's
when you
great for reading.
Yeah, that's
It's my treasured reading time, 5 hours with a book.
Well, I should ask you what you're reading at the moment.
Oh, what am I reading at the moment? Oh gosh, now did you hate it when you do that? I've just started reading.
Yes, I do.
Glorious Exploits. And I can't remember the name of the author. I've just started reading that, which is magnificent. Universality, which I think was a shortlist for the Booker, maybe Booker in translation. Just loving it. And oh look, there's a pile. I don't know if you can see. I'm just gonna, this is like one of 5 rooms in my house. My poor husband, he's just despairing of me, and they're double
of the books,
double glazed books. There are books everywhere. In fact, I read, I'm just reading too many.
Yeah.
Can't keep up.
There's no such thing, Michelle.
That's true.
Yeah. So you mentioned that emergency medicine is, it's a kind of a scrappy in some ways, and it's very high stakes. I've actually been a patient in emergency when it was very high stakes for me, and I had the chance to observe what was going on. And it's, the rhythms of emergency are quite different to another specialty. I think if you're a specialist, say a cardiologist, you got your appointments, people are coming in the door, there are tests being run, you kind of know what's going on. But in emergency medicine, you never know what's coming through the door. And I'm wondering what about that discipline appealed to you?
Well, when I started out training in emergency medicine, that was 30 something years ago. So it's quite a while. And I was one of the very, very few female trainees to start training in emergency medicine. And it was a very different specialty back then. And, when you're younger and you're gung-ho and you really feel like you make a difference and you can make a difference, sure, once in a while you actually save a life, but mostly it's just making these, really helping people in their most vulnerable time when they're most in need, and using your own hands and your own brain, not sure what's coming through the door. It's very exciting. You have to, as a person, kind of behave at your very, very best, and use every faculty that you've got to do the very best for someone. And it's so amazing, incredible, but it does take its toll.
Mhm.
And emergency medicine is different now with everyone knows what's going on if they've read a paper or two. It's overcrowded, it's dangerous, huge waiting times. It's the crumbling fabric of society, all kind of focusing down like a laser, ending up in the emergency department. All the
Mhm.
problems outside the hospital, all the problems inside the hospital, every problem you could imagine in society results in people being in the emergency department that don't necessarily need to be there. And I don't mean like kind of GP cases. I mean just people that should be being looked after elsewhere, the elderly. Anyway, I could go on for hours. I won't, because I like your listeners far too much for me to rabbit on. But it's a very different game now. It's extremely frustrating, very challenging, morally very challenging, because you can't really do what you want to do. It's really, really tough. I can't even sugarcoat it.
Right.
After all these years, I'm finding it as tough as I've ever found it.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, that's
Which
why
is
I'm
what,
writing.
yeah. Well, I guess, yes, writing does give you the
Mm,
opportunity to control a world in
mm.
some respects, although I do think characters tend to have a bit of control. And it's, I suppose, working in emergency as well, you're seeing a lot of different personalities. There are stories whose endings you don't know. And in fiction, I guess you can control the characters and how their stories turn out.
I love that. I love that, about um, patient stories. And most of the time, I will never know how they turn out. I'm just a tiny little eye blink in their life at maybe one of their most vulnerable times, and I'll never see them again, and I'll never know. So I just get this tiny snapshot of extreme humanity.
Right.
Humanity at its most kind of tempestuous, or it's most vulnerable, almost on the precipice of life or behavior or something like that. So I obviously have had a lifetime of influence of what humans can do when they're pushed to the edge
Hmm.
in whatever way, and that obviously has to kind of influence at least how I see humanity, and
Hmm.
therefore how I write characters, I guess, in a way. But I don't feel I have much control over my characters anyway. I'm very much I have no idea where this is going, this story. I'm just I have a bit of an idea about setting, bit of an idea about the themes that I would like to explore, kind of then get the psychological clay out and build some sort of characters and go, off you go. See, do your worst.
Yeah.
I've never any idea about the ending. I have this thing that characters need to earn their own ending,
Right.
depending on how they navigate this kind of world that I have this tiny bit of an influence as a writer on. And I'm
Mhm.
just kind of letting out whatever needs to be explored. And it's usually a theme rather than a story. And the story just has to work around whatever theme, I guess, or
Mhm.
idea that I'm trying to explore.
I love that phrase that you said, tiny snapshot of extreme humanity, because I do think that's a wonderful way to describe the novel. Not that the novel is tiny, but it's more these glimpses you give us into these stories of people. So I will go on to this novel now, The Revisionist. So our main character is Christine Campbell, who is a journalist who has had some renown. And so she's positioned as the main character, but for me, it really felt like the story of three strong female characters: Christine, Frankie, and Angela, who is not a character we encountered too often, but she's this war journalist, war reporter, and we have fragments of her writing throughout the novel. And she comes and goes, and she plays this really interesting role in Christine's life, not so much in Frankie's, but Frankie and Christine have this old friendship. And I'm wondering if all of those characters came to you at once, or if you did start with Christine.
definitely started with Christine because I had this throb of an idea about a woman who's well-to-do, who's kind of living this great life, but has had something go on in her past where she made some questionable decisions. But she's kind of rewritten the narrative of her life, and it's fine, everything's fine. And then someone comes knocking on her door from her past to say, that's not what happened. And really, I wanted to explore, the stories that we tell ourselves, this revisionist history, the way we have to tell ourselves stories to survive or rewrite our memories. So really, that was it. And then I thought, I love the idea of the female conflict correspondent, and then so Christine Campbell started to grow out of that and trying to work out what sort of decision might she have made. And that was a really interesting one because initially I was thinking, that classic war correspondent, war photographer, like the Napalm Girl, where there's this issue as a reporter, you need to stand back, stand away to record these moments in history and not intervene and change that. But it felt like that was a bit of a trope, a bit of that's the easy thing for a journalist or a war photographer to have had a moral conundrum and a moral sort of pushing of their boundaries. So I had to kind of think, well, what else could she, what other decisions could she have made which she is finding very, very difficult to live with? Quite grey, morally grey, so not a black and white issue, but that she knew that had she changed things, she might have been able to change history, but she went one way instead of the other. So that's kind of how she developed. And then, of course, she needed other characters to interact with. She needed a moral foil. She needed to learn. I mean, most of the characters come about so the story can unfold by, as you know, showing and not telling, how they interact with each other and how how the kind of the narrative comes about. And then I got really obsessed with female conflict correspondence. In particular, the book is dedicated to two amazing female conflict correspondents, Anna Politkovskaya, who was Russian, and Marie Colvin, both of whom were killed in the line of action trying to tell the truth. And of course, as I was writing about journalism and the media and truth, it just felt so urgent and so prescient with what's going on today about the responsibility of journalists and the media to get like verifiable truth out there. And what is truth and whose truth is it? And so I think that those themes, look, as you well know, become more and more entrenched, and you're on the right track because you're going, oh, this is the way the book is going. This is what it's supposed to be about. This is what I'm trying to explore. So that whole, the truth telling and memory and the power of language to distort became the main kind of reason for being for that book.
Yeah, right. And I also like the fact that quite early on, and as you said, Frankie turns up and says to Christine, that's not what happened. And because it's early in the story, we tend to believe her because we don't know Christine yet. So it sets up this whole thing of, well, we know that we're with Christine for this story, that because we meet her first and we can see if we're flipping through the pages that it's going to be Christine's story. And so we're inclined to trust her, and then suddenly we don't. And then at a certain point, I was thinking, well, hang on a second. Can I trust Frankie? Because I didn't know her either. But it was that interesting technique of making us distrust our main character a little bit, or at least distrust her memory and wonder, therefore, what was going on. So I was always slightly on edge, shall we say, about the whole thing.
Partly I had this, I'm not particularly a present tense sort of person. I don't actually really like writing in present tense, but I kept trying to write these in past tense, the stories. And then I thought, I'll be really clever. I'll write the past in present and the present in the past. But the story had to be written in the present tense. And I felt that then when we went back to Dagestan and it was in the present, at least you could trust that because you had to trust me as the author in a way. So this is actually what's happening as we speak. It was really challenging to get that right because I didn't want her to be she's an unreliable narrator, but for no good reason apart from the humans are unreliable and their memories are unreliable and their understanding of the past and why they revise things is unreliable, rather than her going, I'm going to tell a story. she was
Mm.
only telling the story to herself. So, and
Mm.
then, if in the end, it's really trying to reconcile both of their memories about what had actually happened.
Yeah. And also, you can see that both of them are trying to be good people, basically. They're trying to
Yeah.
be decent, they're trying to do good in the world. It's somewhat selfishly motivated, as it always is, because it has to be, because otherwise humans don't do anything, because we have to be selfishly motivated to survive.
Mm.
But still, we can see that they're trying, and probably Christine's trying harder than Frankie is, because she has more reason to. Because without,
Yeah, yeah. And I love, that's I want that's the only way that I feel that characters are really relate. I mean, I think I was asked a question once, oh, she's not very, is she very relatable? I mean, well, if a morally flawed grey character is not relatable, then I don't know where you've been, honey. Aren't we all kind of, flawed? And because the only thing I knew about Christine initially when I starting to write it was I wanted a woman who I don't know, there were just qualities that really resonated with me, which is a woman who, has great sort of moral fortitude, really, she's a woman of principle, but she's also wanting acclaim and needing validation. And she, that came from her childhood, which and had her early days, and she really was hungry to get this external validation, and to have those things, two kind of qualities wrestle in her brain to make her the character that she was and the decisions that she would make seem very real to me.
Yeah. Well, also because she gets the markers of the good life, right? When she marries Laurie, she ends
Mm,
up with wealth and status and international travel and all sorts of things. And an outsider might look at that and say, well, you've made it. But
mm,
she knows
mm.
what she needs in order to feel like
And I also she almost feels that that's a little bit of punishment. She's this trophy wife, and she's not, she kind of refuses to enjoy most of it. And it's kind of, she's just constantly punishing herself for whoever, whatever wrongs she feels she's done, and that she doesn't deserve this kind of wealth. So she'll never really be part of that society.
yeah. And so Angela intrigued me as well, but she as I said, she doesn't pop up as much, and she appears almost like this symbolic character. She's this incredibly experienced, well-respected conflict correspondent, and then without giving away too much, there's a fracturing of that Christine witnesses,
Mm,
and it's like, oh, okay. And even though we were having these fragments of Angela's writing throughout, which were really impactful. So there was a sense that there was something else going on with Angela, but this fracturing was like, oh, okay, now she feels like she's pulling really presently into the story. So I'm wondering for you writing her, whether she sort of pushed her way in a little bit more as you were going on almost.
Oh, absolutely. I think she absolutely did. And in fact, some of the earlier drafts, I think, you'll know this. Some of the earlier drafts, your characters are very two-dimensional. They're there. They have these set of characteristics. And I realized that she needed to be, she couldn't just be this incredible, amazing, flawless conflict correspondent. She needed to have her own demons and struggles. And I think it felt quite real, drinking a bit too much, and
Mhm.
just smoking, and then just possibly having some fairly dubious relationships, and then occasionally just breaking down and going, I can't do this, I can't do this.
Mhm.
But then getting back out there and doing it. And yeah, so I loved, I loved all of the characters, and I think because they're all flawed, and maybe I just feel very, a kinship with that. The more flaws, the better.
As you said, who is not flawed,
It's not
really?
flawed. Cast the first stone.
Yes, exactly. So you mentioned the setting, which is Dagestan. Well, the main setting where
Mm.
the story takes place. We do find ourselves in other cities. How did you come to choose it? So it's in the Caucasus. It's on the
Mm.
Caspian Sea. I didn't know much about it before reading this novel. So how did you
Nobody
write
did.
about
Nobody does. So it was just amazing. So basically, when I'd come up with this, the idea was forming that I needed, I had a conflict correspondent who was going to make a dodgy set of decisions. I basically, and I wanted it to be about a quarter of a century beforehand, and set the current, because I wanted the entire book really to be occurring over one night in Manhattan. Most of it is really just a one night kind of event with Frankie and Christine and their reconciliation of events. So I needed a war in about 1999, 2000, and I'm not really proud of this, but I'm Googling wars in 1999, and I knew that I couldn't really, in good conscience, write about an African or an Asian conflict, mainly because I think it would have been just so much harder for me as a kind of European background to get into it. And I knew a lot about the Chechen wars from historically, and then I come across Dagestan. I'm going, oh my God, you've made that up. What? No, surely not. There's not a place called Dagestan. And then I read lots and lots and loads about the history of the North Caucasus and the Chechen wars, and the invasion of Dagestan was just this incredible sliver of history. 4 weeks of that set off the Second Chechen War, and it was the first time that Putin came onto the world stage. So he orchestrated the absolute slaughter that went on in the North Caucasus with the invasion of Dagestan when the Chechen warlords were coming down to make in the attempt to make a united Islamic front in about August of 99. And it just seemed like the perfect time and the setting and a place that no one really knew about. But I just had kind of, the more I read, the more I fell in love with this incredible country that had been so much incredible history, incredible kind of anthropological history, cultural crucible, linguistic, diversity and mountainous beauty, all of those things going, this country just sounds incredible. And I can't believe I didn't know anything about it. So I researched and I essentially wrote the book. And then I get to the stage and I think, now the book, this is an important book for me. I'm never going to be able to stand up and talk about it. I'll never have any credibility if I don't go there. And I say to my husband, honey, we have to go to Dagestan. He goes, like a waterstan? He goes, what are you, what? I said, yeah, we're gonna have to go. And he goes, oh, okay, good sport. And that's a whole nother story. As like listeners, we don't go to Dagestan. It's just a very, very bad idea at the moment because it's under international sanctions, under the DFAT. Do not travel under any circumstances advice. We will not get you out if you run into trouble.
Right.
Yeah, but we went. And it was amazing. And they're beautiful people, and it was incredible. And I couldn't really have finessed the book without going, as I said. And I couldn't, I couldn't. It just would have been really wrong not to sit down with the people, eat the food, talk to the people, like see like that history, hear about history through the people that lived through it. And what did the war look like in your eyes? How does it, what was your take on it? Eat the food. That was a face any of you just on the listening thing. It was like, oh, never having another unsalted, unboiled potato in my life.
Yeah.
But it was, the people were just the most generous, lovely, friendly, could not do enough for us. It was beautiful, scary, but beautiful.
And there is a tremendous sense of place in that, but not overworked. So it's not like you're trying to prove that you've been there and hear all these facts. It is in the details, like the food and the landscape and just various factors of how people live there, I think is what I noticed. Yeah.
And that seems, it seems only, only fair, I think, if we're going to write about another place, to at least do it the respect of going.
Yeah. And also it did feel like the cold finger of fate. And it did give me a chill actually when it's mentioned in the text, Boris Yeltsin appointing Prime Minister Vladimir Putin. And I just thought this story feels like it's set so long ago, and yet here we are.
Here we are, exactly. And it was his very first. And I think I amused myself. I think Angela says, "Well, he's not going to last."
Yeah.
Spoiler.
Which I think a lot of people probably
would have thought. Yeah, exactly. And then and then of course, so the book starts with Christine watching this documentary made about her Pulitzer Prize shortlisted piece that she wrote about the silence of war and women in war. And the producer basically gets in touch with, because the the Ukraine war has, tickled the world into wanting to know a bit more about Russia. So, which is, I think they all felt kind of totally realistic.
Absolutely. And I was also just reflecting that part of of how effective this novel is that even though there are these big themes in it, war being one of them, but also memory and how we use it or misuse it, or the role it plays in our lives, but at the core of it, there is this story about two friends and what happens to a friendship over time, and the pushes and pulls on it, and who the people become through it as well. And so it is this whole idea that the specific is universal. I think that you give us this very specific friendship, and you also have these details of the lives around them, and so it feels both local and universal, if that makes sense.
And look, and that's, I think you're absolutely right. That's what you want from a book. And as I was saying, it started with a theme. I mean, it could have been, I was looking for a war to start with. It could have been anywhere. It might not have even been a war, but they were the same themes. But then the responsibility of the writer is to populate that world, to make it extremely real, sometimes just as a vehicle for the story, but also to become story itself. And and I think historically those sort of places have their own kind of narrative that's ongoing.
It's also highly readable, because
Good.
sometimes I actually think that's a real skill that easy to read is an undervalued skill often, because we can have sort of exalted, turgid writing from several decades ago, usually, where we have these people held up and say, well, that's what great literary writing is. But I think easy to read is a compliment to the reader. So I'm wondering, in terms of your development as a writer, whether you feel over time that that's something you've worked on, or something that's actually come more naturally as you've gone through the novels.
Look, I think both. I think being aware of exactly that and knowing my own peccadillos and foibles as a writer, which is to totally overwrite, but way too flowery and far too descriptive, to be able to learn to recognize when I'm doing that. So I have this, when I'm editing, very much I'm trying to read as a reader and divorce myself from any role I had as the writer, going like, as a reader, how does this sound? How readable is it? And just paring it down and paring it down. So I think a bit of both, to be honest. And you do get a sensibility about what makes efficient, good, clear writing.
All right, that's my iPad dropping down.
Oh, well, it was like an earthquake over there or something. No,
Sorry, go
I'm
on. Sorry,
you're safe. Yeah, so I think it is something that I still need to work very, very hard on, and I can certainly be accused of kind of being a bit rococo in my writing style. But my now editors and publishers aren't shy about telling me when I'm overstepping the mark.
I would not have picked that up at all, actually, from the way it's written.
Good. They've done a good job.
But it does take, it does take a lot of discipline to do what you've said, which is try to read it like a reader, because we can be so close to what we write that can be almost impossible. So, what are you working on? Anything now, or are you letting the Revisionists have its moment for a while?
I'm definitely working on something. I'm just no good at not doing. And I actually do find that if I take a break from writing, I find it much, much harder to get back into. I lose. It's so much a part of me now, part of my DNA, part of how I just think about how I am in the world, that I have to keep writing. So I'm actually writing a non-fiction book about the joys and absurdity of the human body in kind of crisis, which has been a lot of fun. It's kind of been written at the end of a long career in emergency medicine, but mostly there are a lot of medical memoirs out there. It's not really, I'll call it memoir adjacent, but it really is actually more about the human body rather than interactions with other humans and characters. I have this real thing about writing about patient stories that, that number one, they don't belong to me, even when they're anonymized, and like they're not entertainment. I find it very difficult to walk that line of writing anything about patient interactions. Some of them, I just have to think, am I being honorable about this, or am I doing it for the wrong reasons.
Mhm.
But the human body is so endlessly fascinating. There's so much to write about. So I'm getting close to finishing that. And then I've got, of course, there's another novel that's kind of somewhere in there, just like screaming and knocking, wanting to get out. That's writing itself somewhere in the brain.
And oh, so as in like nothing's documented yet,
No,
just
no, 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 no. It's all just in there. The characters are kind of slowly building themselves. And yeah, so I'm really looking forward to that. So I've got to finish this nonfiction book.
so because nonfiction writing is quite different to writing,
Mm,
and
mm.
often you're often thinking about a completely different reader. There's a different intention. So have you found yourself having to like consciously, you mentioned code switching.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
another code
definitely.
switch.
I have written, a lot of a lot of stuff for blogs and kind of that literary medicine take. I used to write for a big magazine in the US on that kind of that whimsical way of thinking about medicine. So it's not totally foreign. Uh, but we'll just see. This could absolutely fail. I'd written one nonfiction book before, which was a big dud. But this is kind of taking little seeds of it and putting them in new soil and letting them grow. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. I've learnt that I'll have failures and I'll have rejections and all. I'm getting better at accepting it. I'm not perfect, but I'm getting a lot better at accepting it.
Rachel and I have spoken about rejection in the past, and in fact, any episode where we mention rejection seems to be among our most popular. It's something that everyone's got to deal with.
We do, and I mean, it kind of gets a bit easier when you've had a couple of wins. I guess I think makes a difference, and wins just in the sense of we're fragile creatures, we writers. I mean, we're putting ourselves out there. As much as we're supposed to divorce ourselves from the work, it's very hard, and um, yeah, so I think to have a couple of bits of validation of going, yeah, some of your stuff is good enough to publish, others isn't. I mean, it's not just about publishing, it's about being read, or about being listed, or being whatever. All of those markers of external success. As much as I'd love to say, oh, no, it's just about the work. I just put the work out there. Yeah, I'm as vulnerable as the next writer to those. Oh, I didn't do so well, or people didn't like my book. I got a 2-star rating or something. It
Yeah.
never ends.
No, it doesn't. In fact, in another episode, Rachel and I talked to Sally Hepworth about reading reviews, because Sally is very keen on reading the 1-star reviews on Goodreads for entertainment, I think, more than anything else.
Fabulous.
Yeah. So you mentioned this previous nonfiction book, because in my research I didn't see a mention of that. So,
No, that's because
oh,
it
yeah.
didn't. No, it didn't get published.
Oh, okay.
No, went to the publisher, and the publisher saying, I don't think I can publish this
Oh,
in a
right.
very lovely way. So yeah. So no, that's why it's being, picked apart like a carcass
Okay.
and put back into the soil to let it grow into this new book, which and I've learned a lot since then. That was between Miracles and Revisionists. So I think I learned, you're just learning all the time, getting better and figuring this jolly old game out.
Yeah. And that is, yes, if it was a whole manuscript that went to a publisher and they said no, that is a
Yeah.
very thin rejection.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, you are certainly incredibly accomplished as a writer with the Revisionists. I think it's a magnificent piece of work, and I commend it to anyone who's listening who would like a highly readable story that's also about things that affect us all, which we've covered in this conversation. So I am going to leave it there, Michelle. It's been so interesting to speak with you. Thank you very much for your time, and good luck with the nonfiction project.
Yes, I'll probably need it. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for having me. It's really, really appreciated.
So Michelle Johnston was so interesting to chat to. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. It's often the case with interviews that I feel like we could go off on strands and we'd be there for a lot longer, but I do try to keep them relatively contained because you may not want to listen to us for 10 hours. So I do recommend The Revisionist because I think she's a magnificent writer and it's such an interesting story. So thank you very much for listening to me or watching me on my own without my dear friend Rachel. She'll be back and so will I. Bye.